In a quiet Indiana rehabilitation center, a 72-year-old widow was about to face unthinkable betrayal. What started as routine hip surgery recovery took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her daughter-in-law's deadly intentions. Lara Poole wasn't your typical elderly patient. For 4 decades, she had shaped young minds as a high school teacher, known for seeing through deception. When she encountered Sarah's innocent bedside visits, she had no idea she was walking into a murder plot. Lara's sharp instincts would lead to uncovering gambling debts and inheritance schemes. What began as family tension became a fight for survival when a pillow became a weapon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The physical therapy room at Greenwood Rehabilitation Center smelled of disinfectant and determination. Lara Poole gripped the parallel bars with white knuckles, her 72-year-old frame trembling from the effort of standing upright. 3 weeks post-surgery and her hip still felt like it belonged to someone else, someone weaker, more fragile than the woman who had once commanded high school classrooms with nothing but a raised eyebrow and perfectly timed silence. "That's it, Mrs. Poole," encouraged Marcus, the physical therapist whose patient smile never wavered despite her stubborn insistence on doing everything the hard way. "Small steps. Your body needs time to remember." Lara's grip tightened on the bars. Her body might need time, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She could see through Marcus's professionally cheerful demeanor to the concern underneath. The same concern she'd noticed in Dr. Chen's eyes during morning rounds, in the way Nurse Patricia lingered just a moment too long when checking her vitals. They all thought she was fragile now. Breakable. "My body remembers just fine," Lara muttered, forcing her left foot forward another 6 inches. "It's everyone else who seems to have forgotten what I'm capable of." Marcus chuckled, but she caught the quick glance he shot toward the observation window, where family members sometimes watched their loved ones struggle through recovery. Today, that window was empty. Michael was traveling again, always traveling when she needed him most, and Sarah wouldn't arrive until visiting hours officially began at 2 o'clock. Sarah, who insisted on following every rule, every protocol, as if strict adherence to institutional schedules proved her devotion. The irony wasn't lost on Lara. She'd spent 43 years teaching teenagers to see through surface appearances, to dig deeper than the obvious. Now she found herself trapped in a body that betrayed her true strength, surrounded by people who saw only what they expected to see, an elderly woman, vulnerable and dependent. But Lara Poole had never been what people expected. "Let's try the walker today," Marcus suggested, his tone carefully neutral. "Build up your confidence." "My confidence doesn't need building." Lara released the bars and stood unsupported for a full 10 seconds before accepting the walker he offered. "It's everyone else's confidence in me that seems to be the problem." As they moved slowly across the therapy room, Lara's mind wandered to Robert. Her husband would have understood her frustration. He'd always seen past the surface to the steel underneath. Even at the end, when cancer had reduced him to whispered conversations and morphine-clouded eyes, he'd recognized the strength in her that others missed. "Promise me," he'd said during one of their last coherent conversations, his hand surprisingly strong as it gripped hers. "Promise me you won't let them make you small." She'd promised. But keeping that promise was proving more difficult than she'd anticipated. The morning passed in a blur of exercises and encouragement. By lunch, Lara was back in her room, a sterile space she'd tried to personalize with photos of Robert and a few books, though reading tired her eyes more than it used to. The afternoon sun streaming through her window cast long shadows across the floor, creating patterns that shifted with the movement of clouds outside. At precisely 2 o'clock, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her smile as bright and artificial as the fluorescent lighting overhead. She carried a massive bouquet of yellow roses, Lara's favorite flowers, according to Sarah's carefully constructed narrative. In reality, Lara had always preferred simple daisies, but Sarah had decided years ago that her mother-in-law was a rose woman, and no amount of gentle correction had changed her mind. "Mother Lara," Sarah's voice carried the forced cheerfulness of someone performing for an audience. "How are you feeling today? You look wonderful." Lara studied her daughter-in-law's face as Sarah bustled around the room, arranging the roses in a vase she'd brought from home. Everything about Sarah was calculated. From her perfectly applied makeup to her designer handbag that screamed expensive taste on a regional sales manager's wife's budget. At 34, Sarah had perfected the art of appearing devoted while maintaining just enough distance to avoid actual intimacy. "The roses are lovely," Lara lied, watching as Sarah's smile brightened with satisfaction. "Though you didn't need to go to such expense." "Nonsense. Nothing's too good for family." Sarah settled into the visitor's chair, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. "I spoke with Dr. Chen this morning. She says you're making excellent progress." "Did she?" Lara's attention sharpened. "When did you speak with her?" "Oh, I called early to check on you. I hope you don't mind. I know how important it is to stay informed about your care." Sarah's laugh was light, musical. "I asked about your medication schedule too. I want to make sure you're getting everything you need when you need it." Something cold settled in Lara's stomach. In 8 years of marriage to Michael, Sarah had never shown particular interest in the details of anyone's medical care. She was the type who sent flowers and cards for major illnesses, but left the actual caregiving to others. "That's very thoughtful," Lara said carefully, "though I'm sure the staff here knows what they're doing." "Of course they do. But family should stay involved, don't you think? Speaking of which, I was wondering about your visitor policies. Can people stop by any time, or are there specific hours?" Lara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just curious. Michael feels terrible that his travel schedule makes it hard for him to visit regularly. I thought maybe he could stop by after hours when he gets back from his trips." Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. "We both worry about you being alone so much." The conversation felt like chess. Each move carefully calculated, each question probing for weakness. Lara had felt this same tension in her classroom when dealing with particularly manipulative students. The ones who asked innocent questions that weren't innocent at all. "I'm hardly alone. The nursing staff here is excellent. Nurse Patricia especially. She has a wonderful way of anticipating needs before they become problems." Sarah's smile flickered for just a moment. "Patricia Williams? The night shift nurse?" "You know her. We've met briefly. She seems dedicated." There was something in Sarah's tone that Lara couldn't quite identify, not dislike exactly, but not approval either. Sarah stood and moved to Lara's bedside table, straightening items that didn't need straightening. As she did, her hand brushed against the drawer where Lara kept her spare room key, the one the staff had given her for independence, allowing her to lock her door when she wanted privacy. "You know, Mother Lara, I've been thinking about what happens when you're discharged. Michael and I want to make sure you have everything you need at home. I'll be fine in my own house. That's where I belong." "Of course, but there are practical considerations. Your finances, your medical needs, your legal arrangements." Sarah's voice trailed off meaningfully. "My legal arrangements?" "Well, your will, your power of attorney documents. Have you updated everything since Daddy Robert passed? It's important to keep these things current, especially when your health changes." Lara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "My affairs are in order, thank you." "I'm sure they are. It's just that sometimes people forget to account for new circumstances. Medical emergencies, cognitive changes that can come with aging." Sarah's hand moved across the bedside table, and Lara caught a glimpse of something small and metallic disappearing into her daughter-in-law's palm, the spare key. "Sarah." Lara's voice carried the authority she'd once used to silence unruly classrooms. "What exactly are you suggesting?" For just a moment Sarah's mask slipped. The sweet, concerned expression vanished, replaced by something harder, more calculating. Then it was back, the transformation so quick Lara might have imagined it. "Nothing specific, just that family should look out for each other, make sure everyone's protected." Sarah gathered her purse, checking her phone as if she'd just remembered an appointment. "I should go. Lots to do before Michael gets home tomorrow." She leaned down to kiss Lara's cheek, her perfume cloying and overwhelming. "Rest well, Mother Lara. I'll see you soon." As Sarah's footsteps faded down the hallway, Lara reached for her bedside drawer. Empty. The spare key was definitely gone. Her hand trembling slightly, she pressed the call button for the nursing station. Within minutes, Nurse Patricia appeared in her doorway. A solid, competent woman in her mid-40s, whose eyes missed very little. "Everything okay, Mrs. Poole?" "Patricia, could you sit with me for a moment?" The nurse glanced down the hallway, then stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Lara studied Patricia's face. The kind, intelligent eyes, the lines that spoke of a woman who'd seen enough to recognize trouble when it walked through her door. During the past 3 weeks, Patricia had been the one staff member who seemed to see past Lara's age to the person underneath. "My daughter-in-law was just here. I saw her leave. Beautiful flowers." "Yes." "Patricia, in your experience, is it normal for family members to ask detailed questions about patients' medication schedules and visiting policies?" Patricia's expression grew more alert. "What kind of questions?" Lara repeated Sarah's inquiries, watching as the nurse's professional demeanor sharpened into something more focused. "Mrs. Poole, has anyone in your family ever made you feel uncomfortable, unsafe?" The question hung in the air between them. Lara thought about Robert's warnings, about Sarah's calculating questions, about the missing key and the subtle threats wrapped in concern for her welfare. "I'm not sure," she said finally, "but I'd like to be more careful about who has access to my room." Patricia nodded slowly. "I'll make a note in your chart about monitoring visitors more closely. And, Mrs. Poole, trust your instincts. After 20 years in this business, I've learned that family dynamics can be complicated." After Patricia left, Lara sat in the growing shadows of her room, her mind working through the implications of the afternoon's visit. The yellow roses seemed to mock her from their vase, their artificial perfection, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things concealed the deepest deceptions. Outside her window, the afternoon was fading into evening. Somewhere in the building, she could hear the sounds of dinner preparation, the quiet conversations of staff changing shifts, the ordinary rhythms of institutional life. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Something had shifted during Sarah's visit. A line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Lara thought about the spare key in Sarah's pocket, about the probing questions disguised as concern, about the way her daughter-in-law's mask had slipped for just that one revealing moment. She reached for the phone to call Michael, then stopped. What would she say? That his wife had asked questions about her medical care? That she'd taken a spare key without asking? In the cold light of logic, these things seemed small, explainable. But Lara Poole had spent 4 decades reading people, learning to trust the instincts that had kept her safe in classrooms full of unpredictable teenagers. Those same instincts were screaming now, warning her that the game had changed, that the stakes were higher than anyone realized. As the last light faded from her window, Lara made a decision. She would be more vigilant, more careful. She would watch and wait and gather the evidence she needed to prove what her heart already knew, that sometimes the greatest danger came from those who claimed to love you most. The yellow roses continued their silent vigil from the nightstand, beautiful and false in the gathering darkness. The yellow roses continued their silent vigil from the nightstand, beautiful and false in the gathering darkness. Lara's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the phone, then stopped. The spare key's absence felt like a violation, but proving theft would be impossible. Sarah would claim confusion, misunderstanding, the perfect performance of an innocent daughter-in-law. 20 miles away, Sarah Poole's BMW pulled into the parking lot of the Horseshoe Casino, its neon lights casting garish shadows across her perfectly composed face. The stolen key felt warm in her palm as she checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, ensuring every detail remained flawless. Tonight's visit to Mother Lara had gone exactly as planned. Reconnaissance disguised as devotion. The casino's interior buzzed with manufactured excitement. Sarah moved through the crowds with practiced ease, her designer handbag clutched tight against her side. Inside, nestled between her lipstick and credit cards, lay the crushing weight of her secret: $47,000 in gambling debt, accumulated over 18 months of increasingly desperate bets. The usual table, Mrs. Poole? The dealer's smile was professional, but Sarah caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes. She'd become a regular, the kind of player casinos loved. Consistent, reckless, always convinced the next hand would solve everything. Double the limit tonight, Marcus. Her voice carried the same false confidence she'd used with Lara hours earlier. I'm feeling lucky. But luck had abandoned Lara Poole long ago. 3 hours later, she stumbled from the casino, her credit cards maxed, her checking account overdrawn. The debt had grown to $52,000, more than Michael's annual salary, more than they could hide much longer. In her car, Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. The number she dialed belonged to Vincent Torino, a man whose patience with delinquent borrowers had earned him a reputation that extended far beyond the casino floors. Vincent? It's Lara Poole. I need more time. The voice that answered was soft, almost gentle. Sarah, darling, time is something I sell, not give away. And your account is significantly overdue. I have a plan, a guaranteed solution. I just need 2 weeks. Plans fail, Sarah. Guarantees are just pretty words. What I need is collateral, something tangible. Sarah closed her eyes, Robert's face flashing in her memory. The old man had seen through her from the beginning. His warnings to Michael disguised as casual observations. She's got expensive tastes for someone without expensive means, he'd said. Watch your back, son. There's an inheritance coming. 800,000, maybe more. Properties, investments, the whole estate. Vincent's laugh was like ice cracking. Inheritances require death, sweetheart. And last I checked, your mother-in-law was still breathing. She's elderly, fragile. These things happen. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. When Vincent spoke again, his tone had shifted from amusement to business. 2 weeks, Sarah. After that, we discuss alternative payment methods. And trust me, you won't enjoy those conversations. The line went dead. Sarah sat in the casino parking lot, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. Around her, other cars came and went. Winners and losers, all trapped in the same desperate cycle. But Sarah's desperation had found a focus, a solution that would solve everything. All it required was removing one stubborn old woman who refused to die on schedule. Back at Greenwood Rehabilitation Center, Lara lay awake in her narrow bed, her mind churning through memories she'd tried to bury. The conversation with Sarah had triggered something, a cascade of recollections that painted her daughter-in-law in an entirely different light. Robert's deathbed warnings echoed in the darkness. Her husband had been a quiet man, more observer than participant in family dramas. But his final weeks had sharpened his perceptions, stripped away the social niceties that usually governed his interactions. She's been asking about the will, he'd whispered during one of their last coherent conversations. Specific questions. What you inherit, when you inherit it, how the properties are titled. Lara had dismissed his concerns as morphine-induced paranoia. Sarah was family, Michael's wife, the mother they'd never had grandchildren to spoil. The idea that she might view Lara as an obstacle rather than a relative had seemed impossible. Now, in the sterile quiet of her recovery room, those impossible thoughts demanded examination. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in solution. Sarah's increased attention following Robert's death, her insistence on handling Lara's medical appointments, her offers to help with financial planning, her subtle suggestions about updating estate documents. Each gesture had seemed thoughtful at the time, evidence of a daughter-in-law finally stepping into her role as family caregiver. But viewed through the lens of suspicion, these same gestures revealed a different story. Sarah hadn't been offering help. She'd been positioning herself for access. Lara reached for the notebook she kept in her nightstand, grateful that Sarah hadn't discovered this particular hiding place. Her handwriting, still steady despite her age, filled page after page with observations, dates, seemingly innocent conversations that took on sinister meaning when examined together. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted her writing. Nurse Patricia appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Can't sleep, Mrs. Poole?" "Too much on my mind." Lara closed the notebook, but not before Patricia noticed the gesture. Family troubles? The nurse's voice carried understanding born of experience. I've seen it before. Recovery brings out the best and worst in people. Patricia, in your professional opinion, how difficult would it be for someone to access patient rooms after hours? The question hung between them, loaded with implication. Patricia's expression grew more alert. Are you concerned about security? I'm concerned about many things. Lara's voice carried the weight of her growing fears. Tell me, if someone wanted to harm a patient, how would they do it? Hypothetically. Patricia moved fully into the room, closing the door behind her. Mrs. Poole, if you're feeling unsafe, we need to discuss this with Dr. Chen and administration. And tell them what? That my daughter-in-law asked about my medication schedule? That she seems interested in my will? They'll think I'm a paranoid old woman seeing threats where none exist. Maybe. Or maybe you're an intelligent woman whose instincts are trying to protect her. Patricia sat in the visitor's chair, her posture professional, but her eyes kind. What exactly are you afraid of? Lara studied the nurse's face, weighing trust against caution. Finally, she spoke. I think someone wants me dead, and I think they're planning to make it look natural. The words hung in the air like a confession. Patricia's expression didn't change, but her stillness conveyed the gravity of the moment. Why would someone want to hurt you? Money. It always comes down to money, doesn't it? Lara's laugh was bitter. Robert left me everything. Properties, investments, savings. Nearly $800,000. When I die, it all goes to Michael. And what belongs to Michael belongs to his wife. Patricia finished the thought, understanding dawning in her eyes. Sarah's been asking questions, probing, testing boundaries. Today, she took my spare room key without asking. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Mrs. Poole, these are serious accusations. If you truly believe you're in danger, I need proof. Suspicions and feelings won't protect me from someone who's already demonstrated they're willing to cross lines. Lara opened her notebook again, showing Patricia pages of careful observations. I've been documenting everything. But I need more. What kind of more? I need to know what Sarah's really up to, why the sudden interest in my care, my finances, my vulnerability. Lara's voice grew stronger, more determined. I need to understand what I'm fighting against before I can fight back. Patricia stood, her decision made. I'm going to document this conversation in your medical record. And I'm going to speak with Dr. Chen about increased security protocols for your room. Will that help? It's a start. But Mrs. Poole, if your suspicions are correct, we're dealing with someone who's already demonstrated they're willing to manipulate systems and people. You need to be very careful. After Patricia left, Lara returned to her notebook, her pen moving steadily across the pages. Outside her window, the world slept on, unaware that in room 237 of Greenwood Rehabilitation Center, a 72-year-old woman was waging a war for her life with nothing but intuition and determination as weapons. Miles away, Sarah sat in her kitchen, staring at mortgage statements and credit card bills spread across the granite countertop Michael had insisted they couldn't afford. The numbers didn't lie. They were 3 months behind on everything, living on borrowed time and borrowed money. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Flight delayed. Won't be home until Thursday. How's Mom? Sarah's fingers hesitated over the keyboard before typing. She's struggling, confused, disoriented. I think the medication might be affecting her cognition. We should discuss options when you get back. The first seeds of doubt, planted in fertile ground. By the time Michael returned, Sarah would have constructed a narrative of Lara's declining mental state, her increasing paranoia, her need for more intensive care, the kind of care that could justify anything that happened afterward. Sarah deleted the mortgage notices from her email, cleared the bills from the counter, and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. Tomorrow she would visit Mother Lara again, continue building the foundation for what was to come. But tonight, she needed to plan. The key in her pocket represented opportunity, but opportunity without strategy was useless. She needed to study the facility's routines, identify vulnerabilities, perfect her story. Most importantly, she needed to ensure that when the time came, there would be no witnesses to contradict her version of events. No one to question the tragic but natural death of an elderly woman whose body simply couldn't recover from the trauma of surgery. No one except perhaps that overly attentive night nurse who seemed to see too much. Sarah's smile was cold and calculating as she began to plan for that problem too. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Coffee brewing, morning news droning from the television, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a neighborhood where neighbors still waved and children rode bicycles to school. From the outside, Lara Poole's life appeared picture-perfect, a testament to suburban success and family values. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The reality was far different. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, a legal pad before her, methodically mapping out Greenwood Rehabilitation Center's routines. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd made careful observations during her visits, noting shift changes, security protocols, staff patterns. What had begun as casual awareness had evolved into something far more systematic. The night shift was the vulnerability she'd been looking for. Between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., staffing levels dropped to minimum coverage. Nurse Patricia Williams typically took her mandated break at 2:15, leaving the East Wing monitored by a single aide who managed medication rounds for the entire floor. Security cameras existed, but they covered main corridors, not individual patient rooms. Sarah's pen moved across the legal pad, sketching floor plans from memory, marking blind spots and timing windows. The stolen room key represented more than access. It was the key to making Lara's death appear natural, inevitable, a tragic but unsurprising consequence of surgical complications in an elderly patient. Her phone rang, interrupting her planning. Michael's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hey, babe." His voice carried the exhaustion of another delayed flight, another missed connection in a career built on missed connections. "How are things? How's Mom?" Sarah's voice shifted seamlessly into concern mode. "I'm worried about her, Michael. Yesterday during my visit, she seemed confused, agitated. She was talking about people trying to hurt her, asking strange questions about her medication. Confused how? She accused me of taking something from her room. A key, she said. When I tried to explain that I'd never do such a thing, she became more upset, almost paranoid." Sarah allowed genuine worry to creep into her voice. "I think the surgery might have affected her more than the doctors realized." Michael was quiet for a moment. Sarah could almost hear him processing the information, his natural tendency to avoid confrontation warring with concern for his mother. "Did you talk to her doctor?" "I tried, but you know how these places are. Patient confidentiality, family member protocols. They're very careful about what they share." Sarah's sigh was perfectly calibrated. "I just think someone who loves her needs to be there more often, to advocate for her. I'll try to get home earlier than planned, maybe catch an earlier flight Thursday. Don't rush on my account, I can handle things here. I just want what's best for Mom." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but they served their purpose. After ending the call, Sarah returned to her planning. Michael's guilt over his frequent absences made him susceptible to her suggestions about Lara's care. By the time he returned, Sarah would have laid the groundwork for whatever story she needed to tell. But first, she had work to do. At Greenwood Rehabilitation Center, Lara was conducting her own form of reconnaissance. The morning physical therapy session had gone well. Her hip was responding better than expected, her mobility improving daily. But physical recovery was only part of her focus now. She was studying the facility with new eyes, noting details she'd previously overlooked. "You seem distracted today, Mrs. Poole," Marcus observed as she completed her walking exercises. "Everything all right?" "Just thinking." Lara's response was carefully neutral. She'd learned long ago that appearing too alert, too observant, made people uncomfortable. Better to let them underestimate her capabilities. But her mind was cataloging everything. The way staff moved through the building, the timing of rounds, the gaps in supervision that occurred during shift changes. If Sarah was planning something, Lara needed to understand when and how it might happen. After therapy, she returned to her room to find Dr. Chen waiting, her expression a mixture of professional concern and institutional caution. "Mrs. Poole, Nurse Williams mentioned that you've been having some concerns about security. I wanted to check in with you about that." Lara studied the doctor's face, weighing her words carefully. "I've been feeling more vulnerable lately. It's probably nothing, but I'd feel better with some additional precautions." "What kind of precautions?" "Maybe limiting after-hours access to my room? I've been having trouble sleeping, and knowing that people can come and go freely makes me anxious." Dr. Chen made a note in her tablet. "We can certainly discuss increased security measures. Has anyone specific made you feel uncomfortable?" The question hung between them, loaded with implication. Lara knew that accusations against family members would be viewed with skepticism, potentially attributed to medication effects or age-related confusion. "Not specific individuals, no, just a general feeling that I'd like more control over my environment. I understand. Recovery can make anyone feel vulnerable. We'll implement some additional security protocols for your room." Dr. Chen's smile was professionally reassuring, but Lara caught the underlying concern. "Is there anything else I should know about?" Lara hesitated, then pulled out her notebook. "Doctor, if someone wanted to harm a patient, how would they do it? What would be the most difficult to detect?" The directness of the question clearly startled Dr. Chen. "Mrs. Poole, that's a very unusual question. Are you feeling threatened?" "I'm asking hypothetically. As someone who's spent her career understanding how people think, how they plan, if someone wanted to hurt me, I'd like to know what signs to watch for." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "The most dangerous scenarios usually involve people with legitimate access. Family members, trusted caregivers, someone who could be in the room without raising suspicion. And the method? Suffocation would be difficult to detect, especially in an elderly patient with existing health complications. Pillow over the face, hands over the nose and mouth. The physical evidence would be minimal, and any defensive wounds could be attributed to confusion or distress." The clinical explanation sent chills down Lara's spine. "How long would it take?" "Minutes. Maybe less for someone in compromised health." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. "Mrs. Poole, why are you asking these questions?" "Because I think someone wants me dead. And I think they're planning to make it look like I died naturally." The words hung in the air between them. Dr. Chen's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "That's a very serious accusation. Do you have evidence?" Lara opened her notebook, showing pages of observations, dates, conversations. "My daughter-in-law has been asking unusual questions about my care, my medication schedule, visiting policies. She took my spare room key without permission. She's been probing about my will, my estate planning. Mrs. Poole, these could all have innocent explanations. Could they? Or are you looking for innocent explanations because the alternative is too uncomfortable to consider?" Lara's voice carried the authority she'd once used to command attention in crowded classrooms. "Doctor, I've spent 43 years reading people, understanding their motivations. I know manipulation when I see it." Dr. Chen was quiet, processing the implications. "What do you want me to do?" "Document this conversation. Implement additional security measures. And watch for signs that someone is trying to access my room inappropriately." "I can do those things. But Mrs. Poole, if you truly believe you're in danger, we should involve law enforcement." "With what evidence? Suspicions? Feelings? They'll think I'm a paranoid old woman." Lara's frustration was evident. "I need more proof before I can make accusations that will destroy my family." After Dr. Chen left, Lara settled into her chair by the window, her notebook open on her lap. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot below, and she found herself studying each arriving car, each visitor entering the building. At 2:30, Sarah's BMW pulled into the lot. Lara watched her daughter-in-law emerge from the car, her movements graceful and confident. From this distance, Sarah looked like exactly what she appeared to be, a caring family member visiting her elderly mother-in-law. But Lara could see past the performance now, could recognize the calculation behind every gesture. 20 minutes later, Sarah appeared in her doorway, carrying another elaborate floral arrangement and wearing a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mother Lara, how are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you." Lara's own performance was equally calculated now, matching Sarah's artificial warmth with carefully modulated responses. Sarah moved around the room with practiced efficiency, arranging flowers, straightening items that didn't need straightening. But Lara noticed the way her daughter-in-law's eyes cataloged everything: the position of the call button, the distance to the door, the sight lines from the hallway. "I spoke with Michael this morning," Sarah said, settling into the visitor's chair. "He's concerned about you, about some of the things the staff mentioned." "What things?" "Confusion, agitation, questions about people trying to hurt you." Sarah's voice carried gentle concern, but her eyes were sharp, watchful. "Sweetheart, these kinds of thoughts aren't uncommon after surgery, especially at your age. The medication, the trauma to your system, it can affect your thinking." Lara felt a chill of recognition. This was how it would begin: the systematic undermining of her credibility, the careful construction of a narrative that would explain away any accusations she might make. "I feel quite clear-headed, actually." "Of course you do. That's part of what makes this so difficult to recognize." Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Michael and I have been discussing what's best for you. We think you might benefit from some additional psychiatric evaluation, just to make sure you're getting the support you need." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Sarah was positioning herself to have Lara declared mentally incompetent, unable to make decisions about her own care. Once that happened, any claims about threats or danger would be dismissed as delusions. "That's very thoughtful," Lara said carefully, "but I don't think that's necessary. Sometimes the people who need help most are the least able to recognize it." Sarah's smile was patient, understanding. "We just want what's best for you." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, but Lara could see that Sarah was studying more than just talking. Her daughter-in-law's eyes noted every detail of the room's layout, the positioning of furniture, the routines of staff members passing in the hallway. When Sarah finally left, Lara felt as though she'd been circled by a predator, studied and measured for weakness. The spare key wasn't the only thing Sarah had taken during her visits. She'd been stealing information, mapping vulnerabilities, planning something that would require intimate knowledge of Lara's environment. As evening fell, Lara added new observations to her notebook, her handwriting steady despite the tremor of fear in her chest. She could feel events accelerating, moving towards some terrible conclusion that she could sense, but not yet prevent. At 11 p.m., Nurse Patricia appeared for her shift, her presence bringing a measure of comfort to Lara's growing anxiety. "How was your day, Mrs. Poole?" "Educational," Lara replied. "Patricia, can I ask you something? If someone wanted to access patient rooms during night shift, when would be the best time?" Patricia's expression grew alert. "That's an unusual question. Humor me." "Between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. That's when we have minimum staffing, when most patients are in deep sleep." Patricia studied Lara's face. "Why do you ask?" "Because I think someone's planning to visit me during that window, and I don't think it's a social call." The two women looked at each other across the small room, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted. The game that had been building for weeks was approaching its climax, and the next few days would determine whether Lara's suspicions were justified paranoia or deadly accurate intuition. Outside the window, the parking lot was nearly empty, but Lara could swear she saw a familiar BMW circling the building, its driver studying the facility's nighttime security patterns. The hunter was learning the territory, preparing for the kill. Sarah's BMW had circled the building 3 times that evening, each pass revealing new details about Greenwood Rehabilitation Center's nighttime vulnerabilities. The security guard made his rounds every 2 hours, walking a predictable pattern that left gaps in coverage. Emergency lighting created pools of shadow near service entrances. Most importantly, the East Wing's side door, the one closest to Lara's room, was monitored by a camera that had developed a convenient blind spot near the entrance. 2 days had passed since Sarah's reconnaissance visit. 2 days of meticulous planning, of studying shift schedules she'd memorized, of practicing the story she would tell when they found Lara's body. The debt collectors weren't waiting any longer. Vincent Torino had made that crystal clear in their last conversation. "Friday night, Sarah. That's your deadline. After that, we start discussing your husband's kneecaps. Friday night. Tonight." Sarah sat in her car in the Walmart parking lot 5 miles from the rehabilitation center, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror. She'd dressed carefully. Dark clothing that wouldn't show stains, comfortable shoes that made no sound, latex gloves hidden in her jacket pocket. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she'd removed all jewelry that might catch light or make noise. At 1:47 a.m., she started the engine. The drive to Greenwood took 7 minutes. Sarah parked 3 blocks away, in the lot of a 24-hour diner where her car would blend with those of night shift workers grabbing coffee. The walk to the rehabilitation center took another 5 minutes. Keeping to shadows, avoiding the main entrance where security cameras might record her approach. The side door opened easily with the keycard she'd lifted during her visit earlier that week. A simple matter of engaging the receptionist in conversation while palming the spare from behind the desk. Inside, the building hummed with the quiet sounds of nighttime medical care, the soft beeping of monitors, the distant murmur of late-night television, the occasional footstep of staff making rounds. Sarah moved through familiar corridors, her path memorized from weeks of careful observation. The East Wing was exactly as she'd expected, dimly lit, quiet, with only the distant sounds of life support equipment and restless patients. Room 237 was at the end of the hall, exactly where it had been during every visit. But as Sarah approached, she felt her confidence waver for the first time. Through the small window in the door, she could see Lara's silhouette in the narrow bed, breathing steady and deep. Asleep. Vulnerable. Trusting. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Sarah hesitated. The woman in that bed had been nothing but kind to her for 8 years. Lara had welcomed her into the family, included her in holidays, remembered her birthday with thoughtful gifts. She'd never been anything but supportive when Michael traveled, never criticized Sarah's spending, or questioned her lifestyle choices. But kindness didn't pay off gambling debts. Kindness didn't stop Vincent Torino's enforcers from making good on their threats. And kindness certainly wouldn't save Michael from the violence that would follow if Sarah couldn't deliver the money she owed. Sarah pulled on the latex gloves and used the stolen key to unlock the door. The room was darker than she'd expected, lit only by the ambient glow of medical equipment and the pale wash of parking lot lights through the window. Lara lay on her side, facing away from the door, her breathing deep and regular. The medication she'd been given for pain would keep her deeply asleep. Sarah had confirmed the dosage and timing during her conversations with the nursing staff. Moving carefully, Sarah approached the bed. Up close, Lara looked smaller than she did during visiting hours. More fragile. Her gray hair was loose on the pillow, and her face, relaxed in sleep, showed every one of her 72 years. This would be quick. Painless. Dr. Chen had explained the process during their hypothetical conversation. A pillow over the face, pressure for just a few minutes, and it would be over. In an elderly patient recovering from surgery, sudden respiratory failure wouldn't raise suspicions. The medical examiner would find complications from the operation, perhaps an undiagnosed blood clot or medication reaction. Sarah reached for the extra pillow at the foot of the bed, her hands trembling slightly. The latex gloves made everything feel distant, disconnected, as if she were watching someone else perform these actions. She lifted the pillow, positioning it above Lara's peaceful face. One quick motion, a few minutes of pressure, and all her problems would be solved. The inheritance would flow to Michael, and as his wife, she would have access to enough money to pay off her debts and start fresh. But as she lowered the pillow, something stopped her. A sound from the hallway, footsteps that were too early to be part of the regular rounds. Sarah froze, the pillow inches from Lara's face, her heart hammering against her ribs. The footsteps passed by, continuing down the corridor. A false alarm. Sarah steadied herself and pressed the pillow down over Lara's face. The reaction was immediate and violent. Lara's eyes snapped open, her body jerking as primitive survival instincts overrode the fog of medication. Her hands came up, clawing at the pillow, at Sarah's arms, fighting with surprising strength for someone who'd seemed so frail. "Shh, shh," Sarah whispered, pressing harder. "It's okay, it'll be over soon." But Lara was fighting back, her legs kicking, her body thrashing as she struggled for air. The bed frame creaked and shifted, and Sarah realized with growing panic that the sound might attract attention. "Stop fighting," Sarah hissed, using her full weight to hold the pillow in place. "You're old, you're sick, you should have died months ago anyway." Lara's hand found the call button, her fingers scrabbling for the device that would summon help. Sarah grabbed her wrist, pulling it away, but Lara was stronger than she'd anticipated, desperation giving her access to reserves of strength Sarah hadn't planned for. The struggle seemed to last forever, though it was probably less than 2 minutes. Sarah could feel Lara's movements growing weaker, her struggles becoming less coordinated. It was working. In another minute, maybe less, it would be over. That's when the door opened. "Mrs. Poole, I heard." Nurse Patricia Williams stopped in the doorway, her brain struggling to process the scene before her. Sarah straddling Lara's bed, a pillow pressed over her patient's face, the unmistakable signs of violence in the twisted sheets, and Lara's desperate, weakening movements. For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Then training kicked in. "Get away from her!" Patricia lunged forward, grabbing Sarah's shoulders and pulling her back from the bed. The pillow fell to the floor as Sarah stumbled, her careful plan disintegrating in seconds. Lara gasped, drawing deep, ragged breaths, her face flushed and her eyes wide with terror and rage. But she was alive. "What the hell were you doing?" Patricia demanded, positioning herself between Sarah and the bed. Sarah's mind raced, scrambling for the story she'd rehearsed, the explanation that would make sense of what Patricia had witnessed. "She was having a nightmare," Sarah said, her voice shaking but gaining strength as she found her narrative. "A terrible nightmare. She was screaming, thrashing around. I was trying to calm her down." "With a pillow over her face?" "She was hyperventilating, panicking. I was trying to help her breathe into the pillow, to slow down her breathing. It's a technique I learned in CPR class." The lie came easily, but Patricia's expression remained suspicious. She turned to Lara, who was still gasping for breath, her eyes fixed on Sarah with unmistakable terror. "Mrs. Poole, what happened? Are you hurt?" Lara opened her mouth to speak, but only croaking sounds emerged. The pressure on her throat had temporarily damaged her voice, making her appear confused and disoriented, rather than credible. Sarah seized the opportunity. "She's been having these episodes all week. Confusion, paranoid thoughts, night terrors. I've been so worried about her mental state." Patricia looked between them, her medical training warring with her instincts. What she'd seen looked like attempted murder, but Sarah's explanation, however thin, provided an alternative interpretation. "I think we should call Dr. Chen," Patricia said finally. "Of course," Sarah agreed quickly. "I'm as concerned as you are." This episode was worse than any I've seen before. As Patricia moved to the phone, Sarah leaned over Lara, her voice barely a whisper. "Who's going to believe you? A confused old woman with medication side effects, having nightmares and paranoid delusions? I was trying to help you, and this is how you repay my kindness?" Lara's eyes blazed with fury, but her damaged voice could only produce whispers. Sarah straightened, her mask of concern sliding back into place as Patricia returned to the bedside. "Dr. Chen is on her way. I'm going to stay here until she arrives." "That's probably best," Sarah said, her performance flawless now. "I'll call Michael in the morning. He needs to know how serious this is getting." But as she looked at Patricia's suspicious expression and Lara's burning eyes, Sarah knew her perfect plan had become a disaster. She'd failed to kill Lara, and worse, she'd been witnessed in the attempt. The game had changed completely. Now it wasn't just about covering up a murder. It was about surviving the aftermath of a failed one. The pillow lay on the floor between them, silent witness to the violence that had been interrupted but not prevented. And in the harsh fluorescent light of the medical facility, 3 women faced the reality that nothing would ever be the same again. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real battle was just beginning. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real battle was just beginning. Dr. Chen arrived within 20 minutes, her professional demeanor masking the alarm she felt at being summoned for what Patricia had described as a serious incident involving potential violence. The scene that greeted her in room 237 was a study in contrasts. Lara Poole sitting calmly in the visitor's chair, her expression one of concerned family member, Patricia Williams standing protectively near the bed, her body language screaming suspicion, and Lara Poole propped against her pillows, eyes blazing with fury but her voice. "Mrs. Poole," Dr. Chen approached the bed with practiced calm. "Can you tell me what happened?" Lara opened her mouth, but only a harsh croak emerged. She tried again, frustration evident in her face as her damaged vocal cords refused to cooperate. The effort left her gasping, and Dr. Chen immediately began examining her throat, noting the redness and swelling that could indicate trauma, or could simply be the result of the violent coughing fit Sarah had described. "She's been having episodes all week," Sarah interjected, her voice heavy with concern. "Nightmares, panic attacks, confusion about where she is and who's trying to hurt her. Tonight was the worst I've seen." Dr. Chen's examination was thorough, but revealed findings that could support either narrative. Lara's throat showed signs of irritation, but whether from trauma or from the hyperventilation Sarah described was impossible to determine definitively. Her elevated heart rate and blood pressure could indicate the aftermath of violence or the lingering effects of a severe panic attack. The medication she's on can sometimes cause vivid dreams, confusion, even paranoid thoughts, Dr. Chen explained to Patricia, though her eyes kept returning to Sarah. "It's not uncommon in elderly patients recovering from surgery." "Doctor," Patricia's voice carried professional authority, "what I witnessed didn't look like someone having a nightmare. It looked like..." "Like what?" Sarah's interruption was sharp, then quickly softened. "I'm sorry, I'm just so worried about her. When I got here tonight to check on her, I couldn't sleep. I was so concerned. She was thrashing around, hyperventilating. I was trying to help her breathe into the pillow, to slow down her respiration. It's a technique they teach in CPR classes." The explanation was plausible enough to create doubt, and Sarah knew it. She'd rehearsed variations of this story, preparing for different scenarios. The key was to appear helpful rather than harmful, concerned rather than calculating. Lara struggled to speak again, managing only a whispered. "She tried to..." "Shh," Dr. Chen said gently. "Don't strain your voice. We'll give you something to reduce the inflammation." "She keeps saying someone's trying to hurt her," Sarah said, shaking her head sadly. "The paranoia has been getting worse each day. I've been documenting the episodes to discuss with you and Michael." Patricia watched this performance with growing anger. She knew what she'd seen. Sarah straddling Lara's bed, pressing a pillow over her face while the elderly woman fought for her life. But institutional protocols required evidence, documentation, proof that could withstand scrutiny. And Sarah's story, however false, provided an alternative explanation that would protect the facility from liability. "I think," Dr. Chen said carefully, "that we need to consider additional psychiatric evaluation. The combination of surgery, medication, and the stress of recovery can sometimes trigger psychological episodes in elderly patients." The words hit Lara like physical blows. She could see the trap closing around her, her credibility being systematically destroyed by medical terminology and institutional caution. If they declared her mentally incompetent, any accusations she made would be dismissed as delusions. "Doctor," Patricia spoke up, "I'd like to request that this incident be thoroughly documented and that security footage be reviewed." Sarah's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Of course, I want everything investigated. The last thing any of us want is for Mother Lara to feel unsafe." But they all knew the security cameras didn't cover individual rooms, only corridors. And the footage would show Sarah entering the building and going to Lara's room, behavior that was consistent with either a caring daughter-in-law checking on her mother-in-law or a would-be murderer accessing her victim. Dr. Chen administered a mild sedative to help Lara rest and an anti-inflammatory for her throat. As the medication took effect, Lara felt her ability to fight back slipping away, her mind growing foggy just when she needed it most. "I'm going to recommend that we implement some additional safety protocols," Dr. Chen said to Patricia. Increased monitoring, restricted visiting hours, perhaps a psychiatric consultation to address the anxiety and paranoid thoughts. Sarah nodded approvingly. Michael and I have been discussing that very thing. We just want what's best for her. After Dr. Chen left, Patricia remained in the room, her presence the only thing standing between Lara and another attempt on her life. But hospital policy required her to complete her rounds, to check on other patients who needed care. I have to make my rounds, Patricia said quietly to Lara, but I'll be back to check on you in 30 minutes. Lara tried to protest, but her sedated state made even whispering difficult. She watched helplessly as Patricia left, leaving her alone with Sarah for the first time since the attack. Sarah immediately moved closer to the bed, her mask of concern dropping completely now that they were alone. You should have just died quietly, she whispered, her voice vicious. It would have been easier for everyone. Now look what you've done. You've forced me to get creative. Lara's eyes blazed with fury, but the sedative made her limbs heavy, her thoughts slow. By morning, everyone will know about your psychiatric episode. Michael will be so concerned about your mental state, about the paranoid delusions, the violent outbursts. He'll agree that you need more intensive care, somewhere with better security. Sarah's smile was cruel. Somewhere with less observant nurses. The threat was clear. If Sarah couldn't kill Lara here, she would find a way to move her somewhere more vulnerable, somewhere Patricia's protection couldn't reach. And if you keep trying to tell people I hurt you, well, that just proves how confused and delusional you've become. The more you fight this, the crazier you'll look. Sarah stood and smoothed her clothing, preparing to leave. I'll call Michael first thing in the morning. He'll be so upset to hear about your episode. We'll discuss private care facilities, places that specialize in elderly patients with psychiatric issues. As Sarah moved toward the door, Lara summoned every ounce of strength she had left. Patricia saw. She managed to whisper. Sarah paused, looking back with contempt. Patricia saw a family member trying to help during a medical emergency. That's what her report will say. Especially after administration explains how liability works in situations like this. The truth was devastating in its simplicity. Even if Patricia suspected what really happened, institutional pressure would encourage her to accept the official narrative, rather than pursue accusations that could expose the facility to lawsuits. After Sarah left, Lara lay in the darkness, fighting the effects of the sedative as she tried to think clearly. Her throat ached, her voice was gone, and her credibility was being systematically destroyed. But she was alive, and as long as she was alive, she could fight back. The notebook in her bedside drawer became more important than ever. Everything that had happened tonight needed to be documented, along with Sarah's threats and promises of future action. If Patricia's witness testimony wasn't enough, Lara would find other ways to prove what Sarah was planning. But the sedative was strong, and despite her determination to stay alert, Lara felt consciousness slipping away. Her last coherent thought was a promise to herself. Tomorrow, she would begin fighting back in earnest. Tonight's failure had made Sarah desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. The morning would bring new challenges, new threats, and new opportunities. But for now, Lara allowed herself to rest, knowing that Patricia would return soon, knowing that each hour she survived was another hour to plan her counterattack. Outside her window, dawn was still hours away, but somewhere in the darkness, Sarah was already planning her next move. The failed murder attempt had raised the stakes exponentially. Now it wasn't just about money, but about freedom. Sarah couldn't afford to let Lara expose what had happened, which meant she couldn't afford to let Lara live. The battle for Lara's life was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. The battle for Lara's life was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Detective Ray Morrison received the call at 7:23 a.m., just as he was finishing his second cup of coffee and reviewing the case files that had kept him awake most of the night. 20 years on the force had taught him to recognize the calls that would matter, the ones that would burrow under his skin and refuse to let go until justice was served. Morrison. Detective, this is Administrator Janet Walsh at Greenwood Rehabilitation Center. We have a situation that may require police involvement. An elderly patient is making accusations against a family member. Morrison set down his coffee, already reaching for a notepad. What kind of accusations? Attempted murder. The words carried weight that most people couldn't appreciate. Morrison had lost his own father 6 months ago, not to violence, but to the slow indignity of age and illness. The vulnerability of the elderly was something he understood intimately, both professionally and personally. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to Greenwood gave Morrison time to consider the complexities he was likely to face. Elder abuse cases were among the most difficult to prosecute. Victims who appeared confused or unreliable, family members who seemed loving and concerned, institutional pressures to avoid scandal. The line between legitimate family conflict and criminal behavior was often razor-thin and harder to prove. Administrator Walsh met him in the lobby, her expression carefully neutral but her body language screaming institutional damage control. "Detective Morrison, thank you for coming so quickly. I want to emphasize that Greenwood takes any allegations seriously, but we also need to consider the patient's medical condition and the potential for misunderstanding." Translation: Please don't make this a bigger problem than it needs to be. Tell me what happened. Walsh led him through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Mrs. Lara Poole, 72 years old, recovering from hip surgery. Last night around 2:30 a.m., there was an incident in her room. She's claiming that her daughter-in-law tried to suffocate her with a pillow. What does the daughter-in-law say? That Mrs. Poole was having a severe nightmare, hyperventilating and thrashing. She says she was trying to help by using breathing techniques she learned in CPR class. Morrison had heard similar explanations before. They were always just plausible enough to create reasonable doubt, always delivered with perfect sincerity and concern. Any witnesses? Nurse Patricia Williams interrupted the incident. She's the one who reported it initially, though she's been somewhat circumspect about what exactly she witnessed. They reached room 237, where Morrison got his first look at Lara Poole. Despite her age and obvious physical limitations, her eyes held an intelligence and determination that immediately commanded his attention. This wasn't a confused elderly woman prone to delusions. This was someone who had spent decades reading people and situations with professional precision. "Mrs. Poole, I am Detective Morrison. I understand you wanted to file a report about what happened last night." Lara's voice was still hoarse from the throat trauma, but her words were clear and measured. "My daughter-in-law tried to murder me. She held a pillow over my face until I couldn't breathe. If Nurse Williams hadn't walked in, I'd be dead." The statement was delivered without hysteria or embellishment, which Morrison noted. Delusional patients typically provided elaborate, inconsistent stories. Lara's account was stark and specific. "Tell me exactly what happened, starting from when you went to sleep." As Lara recounted the events, Morrison made careful notes, watching for inconsistencies or signs of confusion. Her timeline was precise, her details specific, her emotional responses appropriate to the trauma she described. This didn't sound like someone whose grip on reality was compromised. "Mrs. Poole, why would your daughter-in-law want to hurt you?" "Money. I have assets worth nearly $800,000. When I die, everything goes to my son Michael, and what belongs to Michael belongs to his wife." Morrison had investigated enough family disputes to know that money was indeed a powerful motivator for violence. "Has Sarah shown unusual interest in your finances?" "She's been asking questions about my will, my estate planning, trying to position herself as my primary caregiver. She stole my spare room key during a visit last week." Lara reached for her notebook, her movements careful but determined. "I've been documenting everything." The notebook was a revelation. Page after page of careful observations, dates, direct quotes from conversations. If this was the product of a confused mind, it was remarkably organized confusion. "Mrs. Poole, I need to ask some difficult questions about your medical condition. Are you taking any medications that might affect your memory or perception?" "Pain medication, but nothing that would make me hallucinate my own attempted murder." Lara's voice carried a trace of the authority she'd once wielded in classrooms. "Detective, I've spent 43 years teaching teenagers. I know the difference between reality and imagination." Morrison found himself believing her, but belief wasn't evidence. "I'd like to speak with Nurse Williams next." Patricia was waiting in the break room, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was an anchor. The stress of the previous night showed in every line of her face. "Nurse Williams, tell me what you saw." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words carefully. "I entered Mrs. Poole's room around 2:17 a.m. because I thought I heard sounds of distress. I found Lara Poole straddling the bed with a pillow pressed over Lara's face. Lara was struggling, fighting back. What did Sarah say when you interrupted?" "That she was helping with a nightmare, trying to calm Lara's breathing." "But detective, what I saw didn't look like comfort or medical assistance. It looked like violence." Morrison studied Patricia's face, noting the certainty in her voice despite the institutional pressure she was clearly feeling. "Have you documented this in your report?" "I documented an incident requiring medical evaluation." "The exact details." "Administration has suggested that speculation about family member intentions could expose the facility to liability." There it was, the institutional pressure that made these cases so difficult to prosecute. Even witnesses who saw crimes occurring were discouraged from stating their observations clearly. "Nurse Williams, if you had to testify under oath about what you witnessed, what would you say?" Patricia met his eyes directly. "I would say that what I saw looked like attempted murder." Morrison's next interview was with Dr. Chen, who provided the medical perspective with professional caution. "Mrs. Poole's throat shows signs of trauma consistent with pressure or constriction. However, the same symptoms could result from severe coughing or hyperventilation during a panic attack. In your medical opinion, could the injuries have been self-inflicted during a nightmare?" "It's possible, though less likely given the pattern and severity. The bruising suggests external pressure rather than self-trauma." When Lara Poole arrived for what she believed was a routine follow-up interview, Morrison was struck by her composure. She was perfectly dressed, perfectly groomed, her expression one of concerned family member dealing with a difficult situation. "Mrs. Poole, thank you for coming in. I understand there was an incident last night involving your mother-in-law." "Yes, it was terrifying. Mother Lara has been having these episodes all week. Confusion, paranoid thoughts, violent nightmares. Last night was the worst I've seen." Sarah's story was consistent with what Morrison had been told, delivered with appropriate emotion and concern. But something felt rehearsed about her responses, too perfect, too ready. "Why were you at the facility at 2:17 a.m.? "I couldn't sleep. I've been so worried about her deteriorating mental state. I thought I'd check on her, maybe sit with her for a while if she was having trouble sleeping." "And when you found her having this nightmare?" "She was hyperventilating, thrashing around. I remembered from my CPR training that you can help someone control panic breathing by having them breathe into a pillow or bag. I was trying to help her calm down." The explanation was plausible, but Morrison had learned to listen for what wasn't said as much as what was. "Mrs. Poole, are you aware that your mother-in-law is alleging that you tried to murder her?" Sarah's reaction was textbook perfect: shock, hurt, concern. "Oh my God. Detective, this is exactly what I've been worried about. The paranoid delusions have been getting worse. She's been accusing people of trying to hurt her, steal from her, poison her. It breaks my heart that she sees me as a threat when I'm only trying to help." "Have you discussed these concerns with her doctors?" "Of course. Dr. Chen and I have talked about the need for psychiatric evaluation. Michael and I are considering private care facilities that specialize in elderly patients with these kinds of cognitive issues." Morrison made notes, but his instincts were telling him that Sarah's perfect performance was exactly that: a performance. "Mrs. Poole, would you consent to a financial background check as part of this investigation?" For just a moment, Sarah's composure cracked. It was barely perceptible, but Morrison caught the flicker of panic before she recovered. "I don't see how our finances are relevant to Mother Lara's medical condition, but we have nothing to hide." After Sarah left, Morrison sat in his car in the parking lot, reviewing his notes and considering the evidence. He had a victim whose story was consistent and detailed, a witness whose professional opinion suggested violence had occurred, medical evidence that could support assault, and a suspect whose story was too perfect and who had clear financial motivation. But he also had institutional pressure to treat this as a medical rather than criminal matter, a suspect who appeared loving and concerned, and a victim whose age and medication would make her a challenging witness in court. Morrison pulled out his phone and called his contact at the Financial Crimes Unit. "Yeah, it's Ray. I need a deep dive on someone's financial records. Lara Poole, married to Michael Poole. I'm looking for debt, gambling activity, anything that suggests financial desperation." The investigation would require patience and thoroughness. But Morrison had both in abundance. His own father's face flashed in his memory, vulnerable, trusting, dependent on the kindness of others in his final months. The idea that someone would exploit that vulnerability for money made Morrison's jaw clench with anger. As he drove back to the station, Morrison was already planning his next moves. Financial records, security footage, interviews with other staff members who might have observed the family dynamics. If Lara Poole had attempted murder, he would find the evidence to prove it. But he was also aware that time was against him. If Sarah had tried once and failed, she might try again, and next time she might be more careful about witnesses. The clock was ticking, and an elderly woman's life hung in the balance. Sarah drove away from her interview with Detective Morrison, with her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The detective's questions about financial background checks had shattered her carefully maintained composure, revealing the one vulnerability she couldn't afford to expose. But Lara Poole hadn't survived 8 years of marriage to a traveling salesman and 18 months of escalating gambling debts without learning how to adapt when cornered. If direct action had failed, it was time for a more sophisticated approach, one that would destroy Lara's credibility so thoroughly that no one would ever believe her accusations. The first call was to Michael. "Honey, I'm so glad I caught you. Something terrible has happened with your mother." Michael's voice carried the exhaustion of another delayed flight, another night in another identical hotel room. "What's wrong? Is she hurt?" She's having some kind of breakdown, Michael. Last night she had a violent episode, hallucinations, paranoid delusions. She's now claiming that I tried to hurt her." Sarah's voice broke perfectly, carrying just the right note of confused heartbreak. "What? That's impossible. Mom loves you." "I know she does, sweetie. That's what makes this so devastating. The doctors think the surgery and medication might have triggered some kind of psychological crisis. She's created this elaborate fantasy where I'm trying to kill her for inheritance money." Michael was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could almost hear him processing the information, his natural tendency to avoid conflict warring with his protective instincts toward both women. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that she's convinced the police to investigate. Detective Morrison interviewed me this morning like I was some kind of criminal." Sarah allowed genuine hurt to creep into her voice. "Michael, they're talking about pressing charges based on the delusions of a confused elderly woman. Jesus, what do we do? I think we need to face reality about your mother's condition. She needs professional psychiatric care, somewhere with expertise in age-related cognitive decline. I've been researching facilities that specialize in these kinds of cases." Sarah had spent the morning doing exactly that, not to help Lara, but to find a place where she would be isolated, medicated, and unable to make credible accusations against anyone. The Willowbrook Psychiatric Facility, 60 miles outside town, had a reputation for keeping difficult patients quiet and compliant. "I hate the idea of putting her somewhere like that." "So do I, but we have to think about what's best for her, and for us. If she keeps making these accusations, it could destroy our lives, your career, everything we've built together." The hook was set. Michael's guilt over his frequent absences, combined with his fear of public scandal, would make him susceptible to Sarah's suggestions about institutional care. "I'll try to get home tonight instead of tomorrow. We need to talk to her doctors." "Of course, sweetheart. I just want what's best for everyone." After ending the call, Sarah made her second call to Dr. Margaret Holloway, a psychiatrist whose practice included court-ordered competency evaluations. Sarah had researched her carefully, finding a professional whose approach favored institutional solutions over family care. "Dr. Holloway, this is Lara Poole. I'm calling about my mother-in-law, Lara Poole. She's currently at Greenwood Rehabilitation Center, and I'm very concerned about her deteriorating mental state." What kind of symptoms are you observing? Paranoid delusions, violent outbursts, accusations against family members. She's created an elaborate fantasy that I'm trying to harm her. The doctors at Greenwood have suggested psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Holloway's voice carried professional interest. These symptoms aren't uncommon in elderly patients, especially following surgical trauma. I could arrange an evaluation, though I should mention that my schedule is quite full. Sarah had anticipated this. Doctor, I understand you're busy, but this is becoming urgent. She's made accusations to the police, and we're concerned about what she might do next. Money is no object if you can see her quickly. I might be able to fit her in tomorrow afternoon. Perfect. Sarah knew that Dr. Holloway's initial evaluation would likely recommend institutional care, especially if Sarah provided the right context about Lara's episodes and, quote, dangerous behavior. Her third call was to Vincent Torino. Vincent, it's Sarah. I need more time. Sarah, darling, we've discussed this. Time isn't something I can keep extending indefinitely. I understand, but there have been complications. The situation with my mother-in-law has become more complex than expected. Complex how? She's still alive. And she's making accusations that are drawing unwanted attention. Vincent's laugh was cold. Sarah, are you telling me you tried to solve your financial problems through violence and failed? It's handled. She's going to be declared mentally incompetent and committed to a psychiatric facility. Once that happens, any accusations she makes will be dismissed as delusions. And how long will this process take? A few days, a week at most. You have 3 days, Sarah. After that, my employers become impatient, and impatient people do unpredictable things. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with a mixture of terror and determination. 3 days to have Lara declared incompetent and committed. 3 days to silence her permanently through legal means rather than physical violence. Meanwhile, at Greenwood Rehabilitation Center, Lara was conducting her own form of warfare. The notebook that had documented Sarah's suspicious behavior was now being supplemented with detailed accounts of the attack, Patricia's witness testimony, and her observations of institutional pressures to dismiss her claims. But Lara's most important weapon was her mind, still sharp despite her age, still capable of the strategic thinking that had made her an effective teacher for over 4 decades. Patricia, she said when the nurse checked on her during afternoon rounds, I need your help with something. Of course, Mrs. Poole, what do you need? I need you to help me document everything that's happening, not just the medical aspects, but the family dynamics, the pressure from administration, the way this investigation is being handled. Patricia glanced toward the door, then moved closer to the bed. Mrs. Poole, I want to help, but I have to be careful. Administration has already spoken to me about the importance of objective reporting and avoiding speculation about family member motivations. They're trying to silence you. They're protecting the facility from liability. But yes, the effect is the same. Lara pulled out a second notebook, one she'd been keeping hidden more carefully. This contains everything I can remember about Sarah's behavior over the past 2 years. Patterns of manipulation, questions about money, comments about my health and mortality. I need someone I trust to keep a copy. Patricia took the notebook, recognizing the trust Lara was placing in her. What are you planning? To fight back. Sarah thinks she can destroy my credibility by having me declared mentally incompetent. She's probably already arranging for psychiatric evaluation by someone who specializes in recommending institutional care. How do you know that? Because it's what I would do if I were trying to silence an inconvenient witness. Lara's smile was grim but determined. I've been underestimated before, Patricia. Sarah sees a frail old woman whose word can be dismissed. She doesn't see the strategist who managed difficult students for 43 years. When Michael arrived that evening, rushing from the airport still carrying his overnight bag, the scene Sarah had orchestrated was perfect. Lara, still hoarse from her throat trauma, appearing agitated and confused as she tried to explain the attack. Sarah, patient and concerned, gently contradicting her mother-in-law's delusions while expressing heartbreak over her deteriorating condition. Mom, Sarah told me you've been having some difficulties. How are you feeling? Lara looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion, the guilt, the overwhelming desire to avoid confrontation that had characterized his approach to family problems his entire life. Sarah had chosen her victim well. "Michael, your wife tried to murder me 2 nights ago. She held a pillow over my face until I couldn't breathe." Michael's expression was pained. "Mom, that's not. Sarah was trying to help you through a panic attack. The doctors explained about the medication side effects, the confusion that can happen after surgery." "I'm not confused. I know the difference between help and attempted murder." Sarah placed a gentle hand on Michael's arm. "The doctors think she needs professional psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Holloway can see her tomorrow afternoon." Lara felt the trap closing around her. Dr. Holloway. She recognized the name from local news stories about competency hearings. A psychiatrist who favored institutional solutions, who would see an elderly woman making wild accusations against a concerned daughter-in-law and recommend immediate commitment. "I don't need psychiatric evaluation, I need someone to listen to what actually happened. Mom, please. We all want what's best for you. If the doctors think you need additional help, the doctors are being pressured to avoid a scandal that could cost the facility money." Sarah's story provides them with a convenient explanation that protects everyone except me. Michael looked between the two women, his face reflecting the internal struggle between loyalty to his mother and trust in his wife. Sarah had counted on exactly this conflict, knowing that Michael would choose the path of least resistance. "Michael," Lara said quietly, "ask yourself this. Why was Sarah at the rehabilitation center at 2:17 in the morning? What loving daughter-in-law visits during the middle of the night shift?" For a moment, doubt flickered in Michael's eyes. Then Sarah spoke up. "I told you I couldn't sleep because I was worried about her. I thought she might be having trouble sleeping too, and I wanted to sit with her." "See?" Sarah's voice carried patient concern. "This is what I mean about the paranoid thoughts. Everything has to have a sinister motive now. My love and concern become evidence of some imaginary plot." Lara watched her son's face and saw the moment when doubt was replaced by acceptance of Sarah's narrative. The path of least resistance won, as Sarah had known it would. "All right," Michael said heavily. "Let's set up the appointment with Dr. Holloway. If she thinks you need additional care, we'll discuss options." That night, alone in her room with additional security measures that felt more like imprisonment than protection, Lara stared out her window at the parking lot below. Sarah's plan was working perfectly. Discredit the victim, gain control over her care, and silence her permanently through legal commitment rather than physical violence. But Lara Poole had survived 7 decades by being stronger and smarter than people expected. Sarah had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated her opponent. Tomorrow would bring the psychiatric evaluation, the beginning of Sarah's final push to have her declared incompetent. But Lara had advantages Sarah didn't know about. Patricia's growing courage, Detective Morrison's investigation, and most importantly, a lifetime of experience in recognizing and outmaneuvering manipulative behavior. The real battle was just beginning, and Lara intended to win. Dr. Margaret Holloway arrived at Greenwood Rehabilitation Center precisely at 2 p.m., her professional demeanor radiating the kind of clinical detachment that had made her reputation in competency evaluations. Sarah had positioned herself perfectly. The concerned daughter-in-law who had reluctantly concluded that institutional care was necessary for everyone's safety. But Lara Poole had spent the morning preparing for this moment with the same methodical precision she'd once brought to lesson planning. This wasn't just a psychiatric evaluation, it was a performance that would determine whether she lived or died, whether justice would be served, or whether Sarah would succeed in silencing her forever. "Mrs. Poole." Dr. Holloway settled into the visitor's chair, her tablet ready for note-taking. "I understand you've been experiencing some difficulties since your surgery." "I've been experiencing an attempted murder and the systematic destruction of my credibility," Lara replied evenly. "Whether you classify those as difficulties depends on your perspective." Dr. Holloway made a note, her expression neutral. "Your daughter-in-law has expressed concerns about paranoid thoughts, accusations against family members. Can you tell me about that?" "Certainly. 3 nights ago, Sarah Poole entered my room using a stolen key at 2:17 a.m. and attempted to suffocate me with a pillow. Nurse Patricia Williams interrupted the attack, saving my life. Since then, Sarah has been working to have me declared mentally incompetent, so that any testimony I might give about the attempted murder will be dismissed as delusion. The response was measured, factual, delivered without emotion or embellishment. Dr. Holloway had expected rambling, paranoid narratives. Instead, she was hearing the kind of clear, organized thinking that suggested cognitive integrity. That's a very serious accusation, Mrs. Poole. What evidence do you have to support these claims? Lara reached for her primary notebook, the one she'd allowed everyone to see, and placed it on the bedside table. I've been documenting suspicious behavior for weeks. Sarah's questions about my will, her interest in my medication schedule, her positioning herself as my primary caregiver while showing no genuine care for my welfare. But then Lara reached into her pillowcase and withdrew a second notebook, one that neither Sarah nor the medical staff knew existed. However, this contains the real evidence. The hidden notebook was a masterpiece of documentation. Financial records Sarah had carelessly left behind during visits, photographed with Lara's phone. Copies of credit card statements showing massive gambling debts. Screenshots of Sarah's social media posts from casinos, tagged with locations and timestamps that contradicted her supposed whereabouts during family emergencies. Mrs. Poole, how did you obtain these financial documents? Sarah brought them to me herself, asking for advice about, quote, investment opportunities. She thought I was too old and trusting to understand what I was looking at. She was wrong. Dr. Holloway studied the evidence, her professional skepticism warring with the documentation before her. This wasn't the disorganized thinking of a paranoid patient. This was the methodical work of someone who had spent decades analyzing and understanding human behavior. You photographed these documents? I photographed everything. Sarah consistently underestimated my technological capabilities. She saw an elderly woman struggling with physical recovery and assumed I was equally impaired mentally. Lara opened her phone, showing Dr. Holloway a carefully organized digital folder. Voice recordings of Sarah's threatening whispers after the failed murder attempt. Photos of items moved or taken from her room. Video clips of Sarah's behavior during visits, captured by angling the phone to record while appearing to read. Mrs. Poole, this level of surveillance and documentation, some might consider it obsessive behavior. Some might consider it survival. Lara's voice carried the authority she'd once used to command respect from skeptical teenagers. Dr. Holloway, I've spent 43 years teaching adolescents. Do you know what that requires? The ability to read micro-expressions, to detect lies, to recognize manipulation tactics, and to document evidence of inappropriate behavior for administrators who prefer not to believe uncomfortable truths. The comparison was devastatingly apt. Dr. Holloway had expected to evaluate a confused elderly woman. Instead, she was facing someone whose professional expertise had been honed specifically for dealing with manipulative behavior and institutional resistance to unpleasant realities. Doctor, may I ask about your evaluation methodology? Dr. Holloway looked up from the documentation. What do you mean? How do you typically distinguish between legitimate paranoia and accurate perception of actual threats? Because I imagine many victims of financial exploitation or elder abuse might initially appear paranoid to professionals who haven't examined the full evidence. The question revealed the depth of Lara's strategic thinking. She wasn't just defending herself. She was forcing Dr. Holloway to examine her own biases and assumptions about elderly patients making serious accusations. Before Dr. Holloway could respond, there was a knock at the door. Detective Morrison entered, his expression grim but determined. Dr. Holloway, Mrs. Poole. I apologize for interrupting, but there have been developments in the investigation that you both need to know about. Morrison carried a thick file folder that he placed on the bedside table next to Lara's notebooks. The financial investigation is complete. Sarah Poole has accumulated $57,000 in gambling debts over the past 18 months. She's been borrowing from Vincent Torino, a loan shark with connections to organized crime. The interest rates alone put her deeper in debt every week. Dr. Holloway looked up sharply. Detective, this changes the context significantly. It gets worse. We found evidence of previous financial manipulation. Sarah convinced an elderly neighbor to change her will 2 years ago. promising to care for the woman in her final months. That neighbor died under suspicious circumstances. Suffocation during what was reported as a cardiac episode. Lara felt vindication and horror in equal measure. Sarah's attack on her hadn't been a desperate first attempt. It was part of a pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly women for their assets. Why wasn't this investigated before? Because the victim was 86 years old with a heart condition, and Sarah played the grieving family friend perfectly. The death was ruled natural causes, and Sarah inherited $40,000. Morrison opened his file folder, showing Dr. Holloway crime scene photos and financial records. This is why Mrs. Poole's accusations are credible. Sarah has both the financial motivation and the criminal experience to attempt murder. Dr. Holloway studied the evidence, her evaluation taking on an entirely different dimension. Mrs. Poole, given this new information, I need to ask, do you believe you're still in danger? Absolutely. Sarah's plan to have me declared incompetent is her backup strategy. If she can't kill me physically, she'll kill my credibility legally. Once I'm committed to a psychiatric facility, any future accusations I make will be dismissed as delusions. The truth was stark and undeniable. Dr. Holloway had arrived, expecting to evaluate an elderly woman's grip on reality. Instead, she was witnessing a sophisticated attempt to use the mental health system as a weapon against an abuse victim. Detective Morrison, what's the status of the criminal investigation? We're building a case for attempted murder, but we need more time. Sarah's lawyers will argue that everything can be explained as a medical misunderstanding, family concern taken too far. At that moment, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression radiating concern until she saw Detective Morrison and the evidence spread across the bedside table. For just an instant, her mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. What's going on here? Michael said you were conducting a psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Holloway stood, her professional demeanor shifting to something more confrontational. Mrs. Poole, I need to ask you some questions about your financial situation and your relationship with your mother-in-law. Sarah's eyes flicked between the detective, the doctor, and the evidence that was destroying her carefully constructed narrative. I don't understand. This was supposed to be about Mother Lara's mental health. It is, Dr. Holloway replied, and from what I can determine, her mental health is excellent. Her accusations appear to be based on accurate perception of real threats, rather than paranoid delusions. The moments stretched into silence. Sarah could see her plan collapsing, her carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy Lara's credibility crumbling in the face of documented evidence and professional investigation. You can't prove anything, Sarah said finally, her voice losing its artificial warmth. An old woman's paranoid fantasies and some financial difficulties don't prove attempted murder. Morrison stepped forward. Actually, Mrs. Poole, they do. Combined with witness testimony, medical evidence, and your previous pattern of targeting elderly women, they build a compelling case. Sarah's composure finally shattered completely. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The debts, the threats, the impossible situation. She's old. She's going to die anyway. Why should I lose everything because she's too stubborn to die naturally? The confession hung in the air like a physical presence. Dr. Holloway was recording the session, and Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his handcuffs. She has everything: money, property, investments, and she just sits there hoarding it, while Michael and I struggle to keep our heads above water. All I needed was for her to die quietly, naturally, like old people are supposed to. Lara watched her daughter-in-law's breakdown with a mixture of satisfaction and profound sadness. This was the woman her son had chosen, the person he'd trusted with his mother's life. Sarah, Lara said quietly, you could have asked for help. We could have worked out financial assistance, payment plans, anything except murder. Ask for help? Sarah's laugh was bitter and broken. From you, the woman who never thought I was good enough for your precious son? You would have lectured me about fiscal responsibility and poor choices. I would have helped you, Lara said simply, because that's what family does. The truth of it seemed to hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had created an enemy where none existed, chosen violence over vulnerability, murder over the simple humility of asking for help. Detective Morrison stepped forward with his handcuffs. Lara Poole, you're under arrest for attempted murder and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. As Sarah was led away in handcuffs, her perfect facade finally and completely destroyed, Lara felt the weight of the past weeks begin to lift. She had survived not just the physical attack, but the psychological warfare that followed. More importantly, she had proven that age didn't diminish intelligence, that vulnerability didn't eliminate strength, and that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones who wore the masks of loving family. Dr. Holloway closed her tablet and looked at Lara with newfound respect. Mrs. Poole, in 40 years of practice, I've never encountered such a clear-cut case of accurate threat assessment being mistaken for paranoid delusion. Your cognitive function is not just intact, it's exceptional. Thank you, doctor, though I have to admit there were moments when even I wondered if I was losing my mind. That's part of what makes psychological manipulation so dangerous. It's designed to make victims doubt their own perceptions. Detective Morrison gathered his evidence files, preparing to leave. Mrs. Poole, you should know that your documentation was crucial to building this case. Without your careful records, we might never have established the pattern of behavior. Detective, will this go to trial? Almost certainly. But with her confession recorded and the evidence we've gathered, I don't think it will take long. As the room emptied, leaving Lara alone with her thoughts, she reflected on the events that had brought her to this moment. Sarah's arrest was justice, but it was also tragedy. A young woman who had chosen the worst possible solutions to solvable problems, destroying multiple lives in the process. But Lara had survived, and more than that, she had prevailed. The battle for her life had revealed reserves of strength and intelligence that even she hadn't fully appreciated. She wasn't just a victim who had escaped, she was a warrior who had won. Outside her window, the afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot, where Sarah's BMW would never again circle like a predator stalking prey. The nightmare was over, but the work of healing was just beginning. Outside her window, the afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot, where Sarah's BMW would never again circle like a predator stalking prey. The nightmare was over, but the work of healing was just beginning. 3 months had passed since Sarah's arrest, and the small Indiana town that had once seemed so peaceful now buzzed with whispered conversations about the woman who had tried to murder her own mother-in-law for inheritance money. The courthouse in downtown Cedar Falls had never seen a case quite like this one. Elder abuse prosecutions were rare enough, but attempted murder within a family, motivated by gambling debts and cold-blooded greed, had drawn media attention from 3 states. Lara found herself at the center of a story that had grown beyond her personal trauma into something larger, a symbol of elder vulnerability and resilience that resonated far beyond the boundaries of their small community. Mrs. Poole, are you ready? Prosecutor Janet Martinez looked across the small conference room where they'd been preparing for Lara's testimony. The trial was in its 2nd week, and today Lara would take the witness stand to tell her story in her own words. I've been ready for 3 months, Lara replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. The physical therapy had worked wonders. She was walking with only a cane now, her hip fully healed. But the psychological scars ran deeper, requiring a different kind of rehabilitation. The courtroom was packed. Local residents sat alongside journalists, legal observers, and advocacy groups for elder rights. In the defendant's section, Sarah sat beside her court-appointed attorney, her appearance transformed from the polished daughter-in-law into someone who looked older, harder, worn down by the weight of her choices. Michael sat in the gallery behind the prosecution, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. The past 3 months had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his marriage, his judgment, and his failures as a son. The divorce papers had been filed 2 weeks after Sarah's arrest, but the emotional reckoning would take much longer. The state calls Lara Poole to the witness stand. Walking through the courtroom, Lara felt the weight of every eye upon her. She'd testified before, in disciplinary hearings, parent conferences, administrative reviews, but never with stakes this high. This wasn't just about punishment for Sarah. It was about establishing precedent for how society would treat elder abuse, about whether the criminal justice system would take seriously the voices of older victims. Mrs. Poole, Prosecutor Martinez began, "Please tell the court about the night of March 15th. Lara's testimony was methodical, precise, devastating in its clarity. She described waking to find Sarah pressing a pillow over her face, the struggle for breath, the certainty that she was about to die. Her voice never wavered, her details never varied from the accounts she'd given to police, to Dr. Chen, to Detective Morrison. And what was your daughter-in-law's demeanor during this attack? Determined, cold. She told me to stop fighting, that I was old and should have died months ago anyway. There was no emotion in her voice. No hesitation. It was clear this wasn't a spontaneous act. It was planned." Sarah's defense attorney, Rebecca Thornton, rose for cross-examination with the impossible task of making a recorded confession seem less damaging than it was. "Mrs. Poole, you were on pain medication at the time of this alleged incident, weren't you?" "I was taking prescribed medication for post-surgical pain, yes. And pain medication can cause confusion, disorientation, even hallucinations." "It can, but I wasn't confused about my daughter-in-law trying to murder me." "How can you be certain? In your medical records, there are notes about anxiety, concerns about your safety. There are notes about my accurate assessment of the threat I was facing." Lara's voice carried the authority of 4 decades in the classroom. "Miss Thornton, I've spent my career distinguishing between reality and adolescent fantasy. I know the difference between medication side effects and attempted murder." The cross-examination continued for 2 hours, but Lara's testimony remained unshakable. Every attempt to portray her as confused or unreliable was met with clear, documented evidence to the contrary. When Nurse Patricia Williams took the stand, her testimony provided crucial corroboration. Despite the institutional pressure she'd faced, Patricia had maintained detailed records of what she'd witnessed, and her professional credibility added weight to the prosecution's case. "Describe exactly what you saw when you entered Mrs. Poole's room." Sarah Poole was straddling the bed with a pillow pressed firmly over Lara's face. Mrs. Poole was struggling, fighting back with what strength she had. It was clear she was in distress and fighting for her life. "In your professional opinion, was this consistent with someone helping a patient through a panic attack?" "Absolutely not. What I witnessed was assault. If I hadn't interrupted when I did, I believe Mrs. Poole would have died." The defense's attempts to suggest Patricia had misinterpreted a medical intervention fell flat in the face of her professional expertise and unwavering testimony. Detective Morrison's presentation of the financial evidence painted a devastating picture of Sarah's mounting desperation. Bank records, casino receipts, loan documents from Vincent Torino's organization, all building to the inescapable conclusion that Sarah had viewed Lara's death as the solution to her financial crisis. "Detective Morrison, what was the defendant's debt situation at the time of the alleged attack?" "She owed $57,000 to various creditors, with interest accumulating daily. Vincent Torino had given her a deadline: pay immediately or face physical consequences. She was desperate." The prosecution also presented evidence from Sarah's previous victim, the elderly neighbor whose death had been ruled natural causes but now appeared part of a pattern. Financial records showed Sarah had gained access to the woman's assets, borrowed money against her property, and been the last person to see her alive. But it was Sarah's own recorded confession that sealed her fate. Dr. Holloway's recording was played for the jury, Sarah's voice filling the courtroom, as she admitted to viewing Lara as an obstacle to be removed, rather than a family member to be protected. "She's old. She's going to die anyway. Why should I lose everything because she's too stubborn to die naturally?" The words hung in the air like an indictment of everything Sarah had become. Several jurors visibly recoiled at the casual callousness, the reduction of human life to a financial inconvenience. When Sarah took the stand in her own defense, her testimony was a masterclass in self-destruction. Her attorney had clearly advised against it, but Sarah's need to control the narrative, to explain her actions, overwhelmed her legal judgment. "Mrs. Poole, did you attempt to murder your mother-in-law?" "I was trying to help her. She was having a panic attack, hyperventilating. I was using techniques I learned." "Then why did you confess to attempted murder when confronted with the evidence?" Sarah's facade cracked again. "Because everyone was making me out to be some kind of monster. The pressure, The accusations, the way they were twisting everything I'd done out of love and concern. But you did say she was going to die anyway, didn't you? I was upset, overwhelmed. People say things they don't mean when they're under that kind of stress. The jury wasn't buying it. Sarah's attempts to explain away her confession only reinforced the calculated nature of her actions. Closing arguments were swift and definitive. Prosecutor Martinez laid out the evidence methodically: motive, opportunity, means, and confession. The defense's closing was an exercise in futility, asking the jury to ignore recorded confessions and witness testimony in favor of elaborate misunderstandings. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of elder abuse resulting in bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, we find the defendant guilty. Sarah's sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Patricia Harrison, herself a woman in her 60s, delivered a sentence that reflected both the severity of the crimes and the broader implications for elder protection. Mrs. Poole, you violated the most basic trust that exists in families, the obligation to protect rather than exploit those who are vulnerable. Your actions were calculated, deliberate, and showed a profound disregard for human life. This court sentences you to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. The sentence was longer than anyone had expected, but Judge Harrison's rationale was clear. Elder abuse would not be tolerated, and those who preyed on vulnerable populations would face the full consequences of their actions. In the months following the trial, Greenwood Rehabilitation Center implemented sweeping changes to their security protocols. Patricia Williams was promoted to Director of Patient Safety, tasked with developing training programs to help staff recognize signs of family manipulation and abuse. Her courage in speaking truth despite institutional pressure had made her a leader in the field. Dr. Chen spearheaded new protocols for documenting and investigating patient concerns about family members. The medical community was beginning to recognize that dismissing elder complaints as confusion or paranoia could have deadly consequences. For Lara, the healing process was more complex than physical rehabilitation. The trauma of the attack, the betrayal by someone she'd trusted, the systematic attempt to destroy her credibility, all of it required processing and recovery. But there was also empowerment in survival, strength discovered in the process of fighting back. Lara had not just endured. She had prevailed through intelligence, documentation, and the courage to speak truth, even when it seemed no one wanted to hear it. Michael's journey was perhaps the most difficult. The divorce from Sarah was finalized, but rebuilding his relationship with his mother required confronting his own failures, the way he'd been absent when she needed him, the way he'd been too quick to trust Sarah's narrative over his mother's concerns. "Mom, I don't know how to apologize for not believing you." They were sitting in Lara's living room 3 weeks after the sentencing. She'd returned home with modifications for safety and accessibility, but most importantly, with the peace of mind that came from justice served. "Michael, the manipulation was sophisticated. Sarah spent years positioning herself as the loving daughter-in-law while systematically undermining my credibility. You were set up to doubt me. But I should have seen it. I should have been there more, paid attention. What matters is that you see it now, and that we rebuild from here." The conversation was the beginning of a longer process, but it was a beginning. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt with time and effort and the commitment to do better. As autumn arrived in Indiana, Lara found herself transformed by the experience. She was no longer just a retired teacher recovering from surgery. She was a survivor, an advocate, a voice for vulnerable elders who might not be able to speak for themselves. The notebook that had documented Sarah's suspicious behavior had evolved into something larger, a system for recognizing and reporting elder abuse that was being adopted by facilities across the state. Lara's story had become a teaching tool, a reminder that predators often wore familiar faces, and that the most dangerous violations of trust occurred within families. But perhaps most importantly, Lara had rediscovered her own strength. The woman who had once commanded classrooms with quiet authority had proven that age didn't diminish intelligence, that vulnerability didn't eliminate power, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with physical strength, but with documentation, determination, and the simple refusal to be silenced. The shadows were growing longer as winter approached, but for Lara Poole the darkness held no fear. She had faced the worst that family betrayal could offer, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live life on her own terms. The shadows were growing longer as winter approached, but for Lara Poole the darkness held no fear. She had faced the worst that family betrayal could offer, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live life on her own terms. 1 year after Sarah's conviction, Lara stood at the podium of the Indiana Conference Center, looking out at an audience of healthcare professionals, law enforcement officers, and elder care advocates who had gathered for the annual Elder Safety Symposium. "My name is Lara Poole," she began, her voice carrying the same authority that had once commanded high school classrooms, "and I'm here to tell you about the night someone tried to murder me with a pillow, and what that taught us all about protecting our most vulnerable citizens." The presentation she'd developed over the past year had become a cornerstone of elder abuse prevention training, but today felt different. Today marked exactly 12 months since Sarah's sentencing, and Lara had chosen this anniversary to announce her next chapter. "When I was 72 years old, recovering from hip surgery, I discovered that my greatest threat didn't come from my medical condition or my age. It came from someone I trusted, someone who wore the mask of family devotion while planning my death for financial gain." The audience was silent, absorbed in her account of the systematic manipulation, the failed murder attempt, and the psychological warfare that followed. But Lara's presentation went beyond personal narrative to practical application. The warning signs that had been ignored, the institutional biases that had nearly silenced her, and the documentation methods that had ultimately saved her life. The notebook that documented my daughter-in-law's suspicious behavior became the foundation for what we now call the Poole Protocol, a systematic approach to recognizing and responding to elder abuse within family structures. Dr. Amanda Chen, now serving as Medical Director for Elder Care Services, stood to address the implementation of these protocols. The Poole Protocol has been adopted by over 200 healthcare facilities across 5 states. In the first year of implementation, we've identified 47 cases of potential elder abuse that might otherwise have gone undetected. The statistics were sobering but encouraging. Lara's ordeal had become a catalyst for systematic change, transforming her personal trauma into tools that were protecting other vulnerable seniors. Patricia Williams, resplendent in her new role as Director of Patient Safety, presented the nursing perspective. "What Mrs. Poole's case taught us is that institutional pressure to avoid liability can become institutional complicity in abuse. We've restructured our protocols to prioritize patient safety over administrative convenience." The changes at Greenwood had been comprehensive. New training programs helped staff recognize manipulation tactics. Revised documentation requirements ensured that patient concerns were thoroughly investigated rather than dismissed. Most importantly, they'd created protected channels for reporting suspected abuse without fear of retaliation. "The most dangerous phrase in elder care," Patricia continued, is, "That's just family business." When we dismiss concerns because they involve family members, we abandon our most vulnerable patients to their potential predators. Detective Morrison, now heading the county's new Elder Crimes Unit, spoke about the law enforcement perspective. "The Poole case became our training template because it demonstrates how financial desperation combines with family access to create perfect conditions for elder abuse. We've solved 12 additional cases using investigative techniques developed during Mrs. Poole's case." The ripple effects continued expanding. Vincent Torino, the loan shark whose threats had driven Sarah to attempted murder, was serving 15 years for racketeering after Morrison's investigation uncovered his broader criminal enterprise. 3 other elderly victims of Sarah's previous schemes had been identified, their families finally getting answers about suspicious deaths that had been ruled natural causes. But perhaps the most significant change was in public consciousness. The story of a retired teacher who used documentation and determination to survive attempted murder had captured national attention, making elder abuse a visible issue rather than a hidden shame. "Mrs. Poole," called a voice from the audience during the question period, What advice do you have for families trying to balance trust with vigilance? Lara considered the question carefully. Trust should be earned through consistent behavior over time, not assumed because of family relationships. Love doesn't exempt anyone from accountability. If someone you trust is asking unusual questions about your finances, your health care, your legal arrangements, pay attention. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Another hand rose. How do we overcome the stigma that makes elder abuse victims reluctant to report family members? By changing the narrative, Lara replied. We need to stop treating elder abuse as a family embarrassment and start treating it as the serious crime it is. When we hide these situations, we enable more of them. After the presentation, Lara was approached by Margaret Hoffman, director of the National Elder Justice Initiative. Mrs. Poole, we'd like to discuss something with you. We're establishing a new position, National Advocate for Elder Safety. It would involve traveling, speaking, working with legislators to strengthen elder protection laws. We can't think of anyone more qualified. The offer represented a complete transformation of Lara's retirement plans. Instead of quiet years spent reading and gardening, she was being asked to become a national voice for elder protection, to turn her survival into a profession of helping others. I'll need to think about it, Lara said, though her heart was already answering yes. That evening, she sat in her living room with Michael, discussing the opportunity over dinner. Their relationship had been rebuilt slowly, carefully, through honest conversations about past failures and future commitments. Michael had taken early retirement to be more present, recognizing that his frequent absences had contributed to the dangerous isolation that made Sarah's plan possible. Mom, you've already done so much. You don't owe anyone more advocacy work. I'm not doing this out of obligation, Michael. I'm doing it because I can. Because I survived something that others might not. And that survival comes with responsibility. The conversation was interrupted by a phone call from Patricia. Lara, I wanted you to know. We just prevented another situation. New patient, elderly woman, daughter-in-law, asking all the same questions Sarah used to ask. The staff recognized the pattern immediately because of your training. The call reinforced Lara's decision. Her experience was becoming preventative medicine, her survival transforming into protection for others. 2 weeks later, she accepted the position with the National Elder Justice Initiative. Her first assignment would be testifying before Congress about the need for stronger federal elder protection laws, using her story to illustrate the gaps in current systems. The irony wasn't lost on her. At 73, Lara Poole was embarking on the most important career of her life, fighting battles on a national stage that dwarfed even her 4 decades in education. Her first congressional testimony was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November. As she prepared her remarks, Lara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 18 months ago, she'd been a retired teacher, recovering from surgery, vulnerable and seemingly powerless. Now she was a nationally recognized expert in elder abuse prevention, her voice carrying weight in policy discussions and legislative debates. The night before her testimony, she called Patricia. "Are you nervous?" Patricia asked. "Terrified," Lara admitted. "But it's the right kind of terrified. The kind that comes before doing something important." "You've already changed everything for elder safety, Lara. Tomorrow is just making it official." The morning of her testimony, Lara stood in the marble halls of the Capitol building, her notebook, the same one that had documented Sarah's suspicious behavior, tucked securely in her briefcase. The senators and representatives who would hear her story that day had the power to create laws that could protect millions of vulnerable seniors across the country. "Mrs. Poole," the committee chair called her name, "the floor is yours." As she approached the witness table, Lara thought about all the elderly victims who couldn't speak for themselves, those who had been silenced by violence, intimidation, or institutional indifference. Today, she would be their voice, as well as her own. "Senators, representatives, my name is Lara Poole, and I'm here to tell you about the night my daughter-in-law tried to murder me, and about what we must do to ensure that other families never face this kind of betrayal." The story that had begun with a pillow pressed over her face in a darkened hospital room was now being told in the highest halls of power, transforming personal trauma into public policy. As Lara began her testimony, she realized that her greatest victory wasn't surviving Sarah's attack. It was turning that survival into something larger than herself, something that would protect generations of vulnerable elders who deserved safety, dignity, and the right to age without fear. The retired teacher had become a warrior for justice, and her classroom now encompassed the entire nation. The lesson plan was simple but vital. Elder abuse was a crime, survivors' voices mattered, and documentation could literally be the difference between life and death. Outside the Capitol windows, autumn was giving way to winter, but inside the hearing room, Lara Poole was planting seeds of change that would grow into protections for countless vulnerable seniors. Her story of survival had become a story of transformation, not just for herself, but for a society learning to take elder abuse seriously. The pillow that had once threatened to silence her forever had instead given her the most powerful voice of her life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.